Picture this: a 1,000-pound reindeer bull named Kodiak blowing steam into a Montana dawn, antlers wide as a nightmare, charging full tilt at an HOA president in a cream pantsuit, while her high heels slap the pavement and half the neighborhood stands there filming. That's the ending people remember. But it started with a certified letter from a woman who thought paperwork could erase 3 generations of my family from this land. My name is Garrett Wolfson. I'm 61, and I've lived on or near this property in Gallatin County, Montana my whole life. My grandfather broke this ground in 1947 with a used tractor and more grit than money. My father kept it alive through drought years and lean years. In 1991, he handed me the deed and told me one thing: keep it working. I did, just not the way people expected. About 16 years ago, I transitioned from cattle to reindeer. Real reindeer, fully legal agricultural stock in Montana. We raise them for venison, velvet antler, and agritourism. Every December we run holiday weekends, Bell's Hay Pine kids, laughing parents taking pictures. It's honest work, and it happens on 340 acres that had been running livestock long before Deborah Fitch ever knew this road existed. The subdivision next door came later. 42 homes on the parcel east of my fence line where horse properties used to be. I wasn't thrilled, but I stayed civil, kept my fences tight, waved when people waved, and figured we'd coexist. Then Deborah got elected HOA president. Deborah was one of those people who confused community with obedience. Pearl's blazer, clipboard smile, sharp as glass. She'd moved from Scottsdale 2 years earlier and immediately developed opinions about fence styles, chickens' noise, and anything else that reminded her she lived next to real country. The first shot she took at me came by certified mail. I signed for it at the end of my gravel drive on a cold March morning. The letter said my reindeer were in violation of the HOA's aesthetic covenant: large ungulates visible from common roadways, harmful to community character, 30 days to remediate. I laughed once because my property was not in the HOA, never had been, never would be. Still, I knew better than to treat stupidity like it wasn't dangerous. So I set the letter on my kitchen table, made coffee in the old percolator, listened to Kodiak bellow from the east pasture, and called my attorney Calhoun Briggs. I read him the letter. He said, they don't have standing. They can't push HOA covenants onto non-member land just because they don't like looking at it. I asked him why Deborah sent it anyway. He said because official paper scares tired people. That was the moment I understood her. She wasn't counting on law, she was counting on pressure. So we answered the right way: polite, certified, documented. My land was outside HOA jurisdiction, my operation was legal, and any further interference would be preserved in the record. Deborah responded by escalating. She copied the HOA board county offices and filed a complaint with animal control about dangerous exotic animals near homes. Animal control came out within a week. Young Officer Peterson walked the fence line with me, checked my permits, checked my fence, watched Kodiak grazing well back from the road, and finally said, Mr. Wolfson, everything here is compliant. Then he lowered his voice and added, we've had several complaints from that HOA lately, different properties. There it was, the pattern. Deborah wasn't reacting to a problem, she was building one. From that point on, I documented everything. Every letter, every email, every complaint, every time her Lexus crept along my fence line. Calhoun said, when someone uses process as a weapon, you survive by doing process better. So I built a paper trail cleaner than a church shirt. Then came the twist that turned this from annoying to dangerous. Calhoun filed a records request for communications between the HOA and county personnel about my property. Weeks later, I found one email from Deborah to a planning liaison calling my ranch a blight on the development corridor and suggesting the county revisit agricultural land use along my road for future residential growth. That changed everything. She wasn't just trying to get rid of my reindeer, she was trying to get rid of my ranch. My neighbor Rutherford Gaines, who'd gotten his own letter about his sheep, said it best. She's not scared of the animals, Garrett, she's scared we're still here. So I stopped playing defense. I called Meredith Ashby at the Montana Working Land Alliance. She told me mine was the third family operation in the county to get this kind of treatment in 2 years. Not a misunderstanding, a campaign. Around the same time, Deborah went to the local paper and gave them a dramatic little speech about dangerous exotic wildlife and falling property values. They printed her side without calling me. Fine. I wrote a response and attached documentation. That brought me something Deborah didn't expect: support. Letters started arriving from families in the subdivision whose kids loved the holiday weekends, from old-timers Tired of seeing working land treated like an embarrassment from people who didn't want their HOA turned into a private weapon, I saved every one. Then Deborah made the mistake that buried her. She got greedy. Calhoun filed a second records request, this time aimed at HOA financial disclosures. The reserve fund money meant for roads, lights, common areas had been drained hard. Legal fees. A community aesthetic study from a Scottsdale firm owned by Deborah's brother-in-law. And a $12,000 payment to a lobbying outfit in Helena tied to rural residential zoning. That was the real story. She had used her neighbor's money to bankroll her war on agricultural land. Calhoun filed a formal nonprofit compliance complaint with the state. Meredith connected me to a regional agricultural reporter named Cora Beaumont. We timed everything carefully. Complaint filed documents verified HOA members already asking questions. Drop the truth too early and people call it gossip. Drop it with receipts and it lands like an anvil. Meanwhile, I kept running the ranch. Feedwater fence checks volunteers on weekends. One of those volunteers was a 15-year-old girl who wanted to study wildlife biology. By summer, she was explaining velvet growth better than most adults. While Deborah kept talking about community, actual community was forming out by my barn. Then Deborah filed a nuisance suit. That one almost made me feel bad for her. Montana's right to farm protections were built for cases exactly like that. My operation had been there 16 years before she ever arrived. Legal, established, compliant. Calhoun answered with an affirmative defense and a counterclaim because by then her scare campaign had already cost me business. She got more desperate after that. More drive-bys, more videos, more posts online. She filmed Kodiak in the East Pasture and posted him like he was some monster outside the gates. Animal control came out again. Same officer, same fence, same no violation report. Peterson told me this was his third visit in 2 months and that every complaint had ended the same way. Then Cora's article went live. By noon, it was all over regional agricultural news and Montana social media. The piece laid out everything: the false complaints, the land use pressure, the reserve fund spending, the family contract, the state complaint, the board member who resigned after realizing what Deborah had done. That board member was Dorothy Keller, a retired schoolteacher who joined the HOA because she cared about flower planters and ended up discovering she'd been helping finance a private crusade. The following Tuesday, Deborah held a public safety forum at the HOA clubhouse. She meant it as a pressure event. I didn't go. Calhoun told me not to give her the stage. But Rutherford went. Dorothy went. Meredith went. Families from my potluck went. A TV crew from Bozeman went. Even ranchers from the Alliance showed up outside and stood there in boots and truck caps, quiet as fence posts. Inside, Deborah started her presentation, charts, property values, clips of Kodiak, the whole fear-based routine. Then Dorothy stood up and asked why the board still hadn't answered the overdue financial disclosure requests. Somebody else asked about the reserve fund. Then phones started buzzing. News alert. The state had officially acknowledged the complaint and opened a preliminary investigation into the HOA. I'm told Deborah went still. Then she stormed out the side door toward the parking lot. The clubhouse lawn sits near the corner of my east pasture. Kodiak had been there all day, watchful and territorial. Deborah came out, fast heels clicking, talking loudly on her phone, full of outrage. Kodiak saw sudden movement near his boundary and did what Kodiak does when something acts foolish around his fence. He charged, 30 yards in a flash, hooves pounding, steam blasting from his nose, antlers rocking. He hit the electric line and stopped, because that fence holds. Deborah screamed, dropped her phone, spun around and sprinted for her Lexus, while cameras rolled and neighbors scattered. Kodiak tossed his rack once, snorted, and went right back to grazing. I wasn't there. I watched it on the evening news like everybody else. 11 days later, the nuisance suit was withdrawn. Not long after that, the state concluded the HOA had violated its own governing rules through undisclosed related party contracts and unauthorized reserve fund spending. An audit was ordered. Oversight followed. Deborah resigned as president within weeks. And here's the truth of it. The charge was satisfying, sure, but that wasn't the real win. The real win was slower. Knowing the law. Keeping the records. Refusing to be bullied by somebody who believed confidence was the same thing as authority. That's the bitter lesson I learned. Greed doesn't always come at you looking greedy. Sometimes it shows up smiling, talking about standards, asking everybody else to sacrifice while it raids the cash box. By December, the HOA had new leadership, and they reached out about joining our holiday weekends instead of fighting them. Families from that same subdivision came over, fed reindeer from flat palms, drank hot cider in the cold, and let their kids laugh on land. Deborah once tried to regulate out of existence. The teenage volunteer got a scholarship recommendation from me. The bookings filled up. Rutherford and I started helping organize local landowners so the next rancher won't have to fight alone. As for Kodiak, he doesn't know he became a legend. He just knows the clover is good in the east pasture and nobody loud comes near his fence anymore. So let me ask you this. When somebody uses rules, status, and bureaucracy to push decent people off their own ground, where's the line between defending yourself and making sure karma gets a front row seat? Tell me what you think. Who was right? Who was wrong? And have you ever had to deal with an HOA, a bully, or a neighbor so drunk on tiny power they forgot the world doesn't belong to them? Share your story. I'd love to hear it.